We visited the colorful state of Colorado on a 9-day road trip in September. And we were blown away with everything it had to offer. If you haven't been there, we highly recommend visiting and have the perfect itinerary for you. For our trip, we did a loop around the state, and there's a lot to unpack for one video, so we've split it into 3 parts, and this video is going to focus on the first part of our trip. We started our road trip by heading south from Denver to Colorado Springs. Our plan was to cover Pikes Peak and Garden of the Gods on day 1. We went for Pikes Peak in the morning because wildlife is more active at that time. Pikes Peak sits at an elevation of 14,115 feet and is the highest summit of the southern Front Range of the Rocky Mountains. To drive to the summit of Pikes Peak during summer, you have to make a reservation at drivepikespeak.com. For 2 people, it costs us $30. This is a new requirement since the creation of the new Summit Visitor Center in 2021. The drive to the top can be terrifying for people like me who are afraid of heights, but if we made it to the top, you can too. And spoiler alert, it was definitely worth it. It's a 19-mile drive one way, but it's recommended that you have at least half a tank of fuel. The narrow winding roads that you drive also host the annual Pikes Peak International Hill Climb, or the Race to the Clouds, the country's highest altitude auto race. The drive to the top is exciting and very exposed at places. It's regarded as one of the most scenic drives in Colorado, but if you're the one driving, definitely keep your eyes firmly on the road. Pikes Peak is home to one of Colorado's biggest bighorn sheep herds. We encountered a mama sheep with her lamb on our way up. Once you reach the top, there's a big parking lot, but it was still pretty full when we got there. You get beautiful 360-degree views of the mountains around. On a clear day, you can see 5 different states from the summit, including, of course, Colorado, but also Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and Kansas. It can get really windy though, so make sure you're prepared for that. The summit of Pikes Peak is typically 30 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit colder than the base, and the pressure is much lower, so you might find yourself breathing harder. The new visitor center opened in 2021. You can still see the remains of the old summit house that served for over 60 years. The new visitor center has lovely exhibits on the history of the mountain as well as the weather patterns at the top. The building also has proper restrooms. There is also a gift shop and, of course, the famous Pikes Peak donut shop. You want to keep at least 3 hours for the trip to Pikes Peak if you're going by car. If you're not comfortable with the drive, there's also the Cog Railway that can take you on a round trip to the summit. The train departs from Manitou Springs and runs all year round. Make sure to check availability though, the train usually sells out a couple weeks in advance in the summers. On the way down, make sure you switch to manual and drive in a lower gear to avoid the brakes from overheating. Our next stop was Garden of the Gods. Garden of the Gods is close to the base of Pikes Peak and features stunning geological formations with nature trails around them. Spread over about 480 acres, Garden of the Gods is home to 19 sandstone rock formations. Fun fact, when surveyors came upon the park, they thought it would be fit for a beer garden. One of them was quite taken by the rock formations and felt it was a place fit for the gods to assemble. It has been called the Garden of the Gods ever since. Garden of the Gods was gifted to Colorado Springs by the family of Charles Elliott Perkins under the condition that the park remain free to all visitors forever, so there is no fee to visit the park. Since the park is free, parking can take time even though they have a huge parking lot. You can decide to drive through the park or explore the trails on foot. You can even rent a bike or book horse riding experiences. Plan to spend a minimum of 2 to 3 hours at the park and bring some water with you. Dogs are allowed as long as they are on a leash. We underestimated the amount of time we would need and ended up staying there pretty late. After visiting these beautiful and vastly different landscapes, we headed to the town of Colorado Springs for the night. Colorado Springs is located at the eastern foot of the Rocky Mountains. It's a beautiful setting with buildings overlooking the mountains. We stayed at the Hilton Garden Inn at Colorado Springs downtown. The room was nice and big, but we weren't very impressed with the breakfast. While we found Colorado Springs downtown pretty deserted during the day, it was much more lively at night. For dinner, there are a lot of good options. We decided to go with Spring Orleans for a taste of New Orleans cuisine. The next morning, we drove to Great Sand Dunes National Park, which is around 3 hours south of Colorado Springs. The dunes are visible from over 15 miles away, and it keeps getting prettier as you close in. Against the backdrop of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, the 30 square mile sand dune field with no designated trails invites you on an adventure. To get to the dunes, you will have to cross the Medano Creek, and the flow of the water in the creek can change during the day. Sandboarding and sand sledding are a great way for families to enjoy the national park. You can rent the equipment at one of the many retail outlets nearby. The closest one is Oasis Store, which is right outside the park entrance, and it rents equipment from spring to early fall. You can find all your rentals in Alamosa, Hooper, and other neighboring towns. We've added the details for those in the description box. The entire dune field contains over 5 billion cubic meters of sand to create the largest sandbox in North America. The tallest dune is the Star Dune, and it stands at 750 feet. In fact, it's the tallest dune in all of North America. So if you plan to hike it, bring lots of water and be ready to get your feet sandy. If you haven't been to dunes before, climbing in the sand is hard. We were climbing at sunset and decided to get down before it got dark. We did see some pretty visitors on our way to the parking lot though. After hanging out in the sand to our heart's content, we headed to Zapata Falls. The Zapata Falls recreational area is about 3 miles south of the Great Sand Dunes National Park and Preserve entrance. There is a road that leads you up the mountain with views of the sand dunes on the side. In the end, you reach the parking lot for Zapata Falls. The hike to the falls is 0.9 miles out and back. As you walk towards the fall, there's a creek that has to be forded several times as you crisscross your way up to the falls. There's no particular end to this hike, you kind of go as far as you can. At this point, we thought about returning as it felt quite risky. It's a bit tricky to get a good view of the falls. Towards the end, you're essentially walking in a pool of water from the falls that's sometimes almost knee-deep, but we're glad we pushed through. It is definitely very cool. You can find good lodging options in Alamosa, which is 30 minutes drive from the park. You can also camp at the Pinion Flats campground, which is right next to the sand dunes. If you do stay in Alamosa, we would recommend visiting Friar's Fork, which is a church converted into an Italian restaurant and bar. We went back early the next morning to catch sunrise at the park. The first rays of the sun hit the dunes to create a lovely interplay of light and shadows. In our next video, we will share the next few places on our trip in southwest Colorado, including Mesa Verde National Park, Black Canyon of the Gunnison, and the famous $1 Million Highway. So stay tuned and subscribe so you don't miss the next video.